Thank you very much. I think it's fitting for a French to be linked to frogs to start with. Although it's, I think, the first time that I was introduced by a talk about hemorrhoid, but you have to learn. My talk is about orientation to the future, or disorientation. The disorientation, which was mentioned before, that is, it's very hot here and very cold in Paris, and we have to move north in order to find this beautiful weather. But also disorientation and reorientation, and that's why I asked to do a little drawing. And maybe you want, because I was told it's more like a seminar thing, a piece of paper, because I might ask you a question and make the scribbles. So don't hesitate to take a little piece of paper and trying to answer the question which I'm going to put to you. We are going to, in spite of the heat and the size of the audience, trying to make it a more seminar. The first thing I will start in the orientation thing is a very famous text, which I'm sure many of you know, which is Edgar Poe, Maelstrom. And if you remember the story, it's not very far from you, it's in the Lofoten. The fisherman is in the maelstrom, which is a nice metaphor of the situation which was just summarized before. And he's taken by the whirlwind, and he noticed that there are lots of things which are disappearing here, especially his two brothers who are jumped and in the sea and disappear, and that the boat on which he is also disappearing. But then, suddenly, he remains very quiet in spite of a catastrophe in which he is. And it's an interesting part of the novel, because he realized that it's catastrophic, he's very quiet. And then he noticed something, which is a difference between some type of object which goes straight into the hole, and some type of object which, in spite of the fact that they are in the whirlwind, actually float. And that's especially true of a barrel. I ask to be able to write on the blackboard, but my writing is awful, so don't try to read what I've written. The key point is that he sticks to the barrel, and he emerged unscathed from the maelstrom, in spite of the fact that the boat, his two brothers, and everything else has been sort of sucked by the very powerful maelstrom. So what I'm interested in doing with you today is sort of a detection. So we are in a catastrophe, but we are very quiet, and we try to detect what the difference between those things which sink in and those things that float. So it's a slight difference. We have to do a sort of sorting mechanism and a trial so that we can detect what is disappearing very quickly and what can float. This is what we cannot expect for more. As Anna Tsing has said in his marvelous book on the mushroom and the end of the world, we live in the ruin, so don't expect to escape of a maelstrom, but try to get yourself tied and attached to what is not actually going to be sucked by the thing. Okay? So this is my little introduction. Now things become simple and then more complicated. The simple thing is, how do we detect? What is the test which allows us to make the difference between what is sucked in and what is floating around? We have one orientation mechanism which we have been using for many years, which is the idea that there is something which we call a modernizing front or frontier, which is the one I've studied for about 40 years, which behind it is basically archaism, and in front of it is something which is precisely the title of your lecture series, The Future, and something which, toward which we are supposed to move on, right? And the powerful feature of this modernizing front is that if you are here, you can be easily accused of sticking to the old ways, of being archaic, or being passé, etc., etc. We have dozens of these little words which allows us to sort of organize and sort of make a gradient between those who want to go back here and want those who are moving here, okay? The modernizing front. Now, it exists actually, as many political scientists have shown, in two different gradients. One of them is about the mores, or the ways of life, and the other is about the economy. So I'm sure people in this room, we divided because some of us are clearly enthusiastic about moving in the future in the mores, called liberalization of all the shackles from the past, and in economy as well, which is embracing the globalization as much as we can. Some people, of course, are critical of both, and they would much prefer not to go toward the liberalization of the ways of life and to be as protected as possible against the danger of globalization. And I think many of us, we hesitate, and sometimes we are fairly happy to embrace liberalization of the mores, but somewhat suspicious of embracing the globalization of the economy. And you could also be the opposite, which is usually more on the many parties on the sort of central middle right, which is that they embrace fairly well a large, enthusiastic appeal for globalization of the economy, but when it comes to ways of life, sexual habits and so on, and family, they prefer to stick to the older system, okay? Now, this is not what I'm interested in, because this difference is actually not that big. There is one really big feature, which is the one that organizes this direction. And here we forget about the fact that it's different when it's more an economy. You see anything? Yeah, it's nice. Now, we need to name those two attractors. One attractor, I would call it the globe. In the discussion, we might discuss, is the name a good name or not? It doesn't matter too much here. This we would call, and it's again a strange and too much a simple word, let's say the land of old, the one out of which we were moved by the movement of modernization. The word doesn't matter too much because we are going to try to see if we cannot think differently. But yet, what is clear is that the modernizing front is still in our head. So that it's still organized the way we share and we distribute what is progressive or regressive. So it's still our compass, if you want. It's the way we organize ourselves and the way we look at the future as something which is organized along this line here. Now, all of that works fairly nicely, but on one condition is that the globe is still the attractive horizon toward which we are actually moving. Now, what happens when this horizon of the globe is actually suddenly missing? And the way it is missed, there are many ways to show it, but a very striking way to understand that it misses, of course, what happened with the ecological mutation right now, as if people were suddenly realizing that the modernizing horizon toward which they were all sort of moving without being too sure it's good or bad, was actually suddenly missing. For one very simple reason, which was demonstrated beautifully in Paris in December, which is that when you count all the contribution of the different countries which were asked to give their vision of the future at the COP21 in Paris in December, suddenly when you sum it, you realize that there is someone speaking here, or is it translated? No, it's not translated. Is there someone translating? No, because there's a background. Someone is talking to me, but I don't understand what he says, so it complicates my lecture a little bit. What is interesting is that when people brought together all these plans for 2030 and 2050 at the COP, And suddenly people clearly realized that there was no planet could absorb all those projections of the globe. So the globe is much too big, so to speak. Not the real globe, but the mental globe of the modernizing horizon is much too big to be suddenly squeezed inside the planet. And what happens when the globe is actually suddenly something people realize there is no way toward it? This is what's happening, and I think that's where we are all here somewhat in a state of angst, because there is a sort of huge whirling movement which could be called the global backlash, which we have not only in every country of Europe, in every single country of Europe, but throughout the world, in the US, in Indonesia, everywhere, which is that suddenly people realizing that the globe is not there are shifting their passion, interest, future horizon to something which look slightly like the end of old, but it's actually, of course, a neo-land of old. That is the land, basically, of made-up identity and invented tradition. I would be very happy to say that this happens only in France with the National Front, only in Poland with the new election, only in Italy with Padania, only in America with Monsieur Trump, but it also exists here in Denmark, this utmost civilized, open, and democratic nation. So everywhere we feel the whirling movement of entire nation, like England, like France, Poland, Holland, etc., which are moving there, not to the old land, of course, because this land, of course, is a reinvention, but which is certainly completely different from the globe. And we are all lost, because we also lost our ways of organizing position as progressive or regressive. I know political scientists say this is populism, this is reactionary, this is a return of a sort of neo-fascist movement, etc. But I think that all of those labels are actually dangerous because they think as something which is the return of something old. Whereas I think it's better and more interesting to study them as something quite new. First time in the history, short history of globalization, where people realize that the globe will never be there. So we are somewhat, it's a metaphor, of course, in the situation of people who would be in a plane, if you want, and they are being traveling in this plane. I'm not going to draw the plane. We are moving toward the globalizing airport, and then the pilot says, ladies and gentlemen, this is the pilot speaking. I'm really sorry, but the globe has disappeared. So we are not going to land on it. And then the plane sort of shift back and toward where it was coming from. And then the pilot, this is your pilot speaking again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to say that this one here is actually a complete ruin, and it doesn't exist anymore. Because the neo-land to which we want to go back as protecting ourselves through identity politics is a completely impossible thing after what has been done with the globalization. Okay? So you are in the this is actually a nice metaphor. It's a big plane. I'm the pilot. And I'm saying, well, I'm sorry, but the place where you wanted to go and the place where you were maybe sort of tempted to go back have disappeared. Then, what do? Well, you look out of the windows of the plane to try to see where would you land. Where is the alternative to land? And that's what I'm interested in trying to draw. Where is, oh, here is it. So see, all of that was the simple part. Because I think, even though I'm not a political scientist, everybody would agree that understanding very, very carefully what it is that we are tempted by in this moment where all the people simultaneously, globally, exactly in the same terms, are turning their attention to identity politics. And of course, the most interesting and telling aspect is the Brexit, which is quite extraordinary in this case, because England was the country of globalization. It invented it. It invented the world market, and it's the one which is shrinking back to a small, quite uninteresting and rainy island, which no one had expected. So now we have to reorient ourselves a little bit, and that's this is why I needed. We sort of thought that the globe as a horizon was defined by cartography. We have a cartographic definition of the globe. So what I'd like to contrast, and that's the title of my talk, and the abstract, is a globe in the cartographic definition, which is, in fact, and here there are many people from the STS community, they would recognize the situation, a largely social and elaborated construction from the 17th century through basically cartography. And I will symbolize just by the sort of cartographic grid that we know very well. And of course, we were very happy when we added to it the blue planet from the NASA, etc. We all know this history of the feeling of the globe. The problem with this idea of a globe is that it's actually viewed from a position which is from nowhere. I mean, you could say, and STS people will tell you what exactly instrument in astronomy and physics allow you to see the Earth as a globe. But for most of us, it's actually a position which is not situated, as Donna Haraway would say. It's not situated knowledge. It's a sort of idea of what you would see if you were in a place from nowhere. And in addition, you compare this globe with a whole series of other globes, the other planets, etc., and you dive all of those things in something which we know as the universe or nature. This is basically what has been sort of captured or kidnapped by the notion of globalization, of second nature. This is first nature, second nature meaning the economy. So globalization is a sort of fusion of one definition of a globe coming from cartography, physics, astronomy, with a completely different but visually and symbolically similar image, which is, of course, fused in the word globalization. Okay? Now, the strange thing I'm interested in discussing with you, and of course this is why I'm very pleased to be with my friend from STS and with Isabel Stengers and Anna to discuss afterward, is that the place where we do reside here has none of the character of a globe. So, and that's why I need you to take a piece of paper and begin to write down the differences between these two sorts of figure. Because this other figure, and here I'm going to draw very bad drawing, not only, which is true, because I'm a terrible draftsman, but also because we, strangely enough, have no imaginary, no visual imaginary for what we reside in. And this is why I opened an exhibition in Karlsruhe in May called Reset Modernity, just how do you visualize where we are, which should be a simple question. Philosophers had imagined that we knew where we reside by saying, the scientific worldview is one thing, but the lived world is something else. So we had an idea through phenomenology, through many philosophical movements, through the humanities, through poetry, that we could actually situate ourselves as a lived world completely different from the scientific world. This was, so to speak, the 20th century solution to the problem we are dealing today. But of course, now with the question of the ecological mutation of the Anthropocene, it doesn't work. We don't want to be in a lived world. We want the world, not the lived world. or we want the word of life, not the word, the lived word, which will let the other word, the one known by scientists, to this view from nowhere. Because now we can't just see the word from nowhere. We need to situate ourselves. So my clumsy, we are here. It's not so nice, I agree. It is a small, thin varnish, or a skin, if you wish. Tiny, tiny skin, a few kilometers here, a few kilometers there, which some scientists call critical zone, to describe that it's where we live and everything else live. It's not seen from above. It's not seen from a position of anywhere. It's actually always seen, and here you see how terrible I am, by scientists and activists, politicians, citizens, laterally. It's seen laterally, not from above. We live, I mean, look at the gardens here. You don't see it from above. You see it de biais, if I can say that. Which is not at all the same imagination as when you suppose that you are here and then you look at the cartography from above and you see it. And it's not the same thing as saying, I'm a lived word and I live a science. The word of reality to the scientist. Okay? So one of the important things here, and I've shown that in the Gifford lectures, is that here we have something which could call, and Husserl would also call Galileo, which is the idea that you can see the globe from elsewhere, from the universe. And here you have something which I associate with a character which for me is exactly as important, with Lovelock. That is completely different definition, where there is something highly special to the Earth, which is why he calls it, actually, why not giving it its name, Gaia. By the way, if you know the invention of the word Gaia, while Lovelock was trying to find a name, his friend, the novelist, the authors, suggested Gaia, which is a nice term, which is actually linked to the maelstrom argument. And Lovelock said, Gaia? No, said something. He said, no, Gaia. And Gaia has stayed. But Gaia is also a good word. So, yeah, because it's not a globe. It's a thin pellicule of slightly fragile and robust set of intertwined life form, which is very different from the vision you could have of life if you have this vision, and which is just as scientific, which is, of course, the reason why in STS we are working on this. So here, basically, you could say this is the realm of what would be called, if a little pedantic French philosopher is allowed to use a bit of Latin, which I know you should not do anymore, it's res extensa, which is this idea that there is an isomorphic space in which planets and everything else is situated. Here it's completely different. There are things in which space is situated. Anna Tsing has a very nice expression for that. It's that she said this space here is not scalable. It's not made to be scalable. This word is entirely made to be scalable. So what I think would be useful to orient ourselves is to have a different name for this one and for this one. Not the difference between the real scientific word and the lived word of subjectivity. Two entirely objective definitions, but pointing to different set of entities and a different set of lived form, so to speak. So I propose a little operation of excision, if you want, which is, we call that the universe, and this we would call, because critical zone is a bit strange, so we could reuse the old word of physis. Physis is the word which was used by the Greek talk, and many, I mean, the whole medieval tradition, to talk about everything which is actually in movement, generation, and death, as well as movement. And as you know, and Isabel Stengers has written extensively on that, when Galileo decided to get and to invent this position, which would be basically the Galilean universe, the idea was to cut out of all the events of the physis, only one of them, which was movement and space. But at the time of the Anthropocene, we cannot limit this definition because we live in it. So I propose, this is a proposition, that we cut out in the universe this little, very thin, very special, very fragile, very lively, very folded part of the universe, physis. Now, one last point, because before I get to the next part, and which, of course, would be of interest to STS people here, on the universe, which is everything but physis, there is not much, there is a sort of epistemological peace, if you want. Because the debates, the fights between the different versions of science and the general and the rest of the public is not actually so tense. You might have different view of the moon, different view of the cosmos, different view of the inside of the Earth, but really, I mean, you know nothing, right? And there is a privilege, and a legitimate privilege of a scientist on that part, because the instrument and the way and the distance with the thing they know is actually in their hands. So you can learn from them, you can ignore what they do, but basically the discussion would be difficult. At least there would be a great asymmetry. And if you say, I think the Big Bang is not that at all, they would say, sorry, but can you get out of my laboratory or something? Now, this is not the case with here. Everything which is there is not the realm of epistemological peace. It is the thing we love to study in STS, which is the situation of epistemological warfare. And of course, one of them, very well known by all of you, is the climate question. Okay, so if you agree with my two first points, one of them is that we were oriented by the modernist sort of line or vector, and that now the two ends of these vectors have vanished, and that we have to be disoriented. And the second point, that we might be interested in a definition not of a lived word, but of actually getting into an objective, quotation mark, scientific, quotation mark, shared, quotation mark, disputed, etc., which we would call physis, or to give it its name, Gaia, then things become politically interesting. And here you need to take your little piece of paper, because we now have to work out our test. So far, the difficulty of orienting ourselves was due that every single time someone had an hesitation about going this way, he or she was accused of being reactionary, archaic, passé, or looking for a nostalgic view of the past. And I'm sorry to say we are in a Protestant country, so I can ask you to make a little consciousness, getting into your own soul, and ask you to remember last time, maybe 5 minutes ago, or 2 days ago, or 2 years ago, when you told of a position that it was archaic, or not modern, or etc., and that you actually preemptively condemn a position because it was not oriented in this direction. And it, again, it can be on economy, but it can be on ways of life, etc. And I'm not going to ask you to say out loud what and when you did this the last time. Okay? But if we were in the seminar, it would be fun to do. So what I'm proposing now is to make a third attractor to try if we could escape the preemptive strike, which has, and I don't have time to develop this point, which has moralized politics as soon as the notion of modernization became entrenched, which is, of course, depends on which century you consider. But is there a way to be able to sort out position about anything from agriculture, food, transportation, morals, etc., without immediately be brought back to this situation here? So imagine yourself, you are now here. You are in the middle, not of two attractors, which we could still call the land, in its two definitions, that is what Husserl will call the archi soil, that is a really old aborigines soil, if you want, and the neo soil. And then you have the globe. Okay. Now, we know the globe has this very strange character. The first one is, I said it before, is that it's enormously too big to be shrunk into the planet. But as all the people who study economics know very well, it has the secondary contradictory feature to be completely provincial. What we call by the global is that means that we obey a very, very tiny numbers of people compared to those who are actually composing the Earth. And I'm not talking only about humans here. So to be globalized means really provincialized by very few and small numbers of people. So this is why the global never works. It's too big to be shrunk in the planet, and it's too small to be actually representative of where we are. So what would happen if we were trying to sort out position? Are they progressive or regressive? Not according to this modernizing front going this way, but if they were stepping, looking to this different land, soil, I don't know how to call it, Gaia, Earth, Gaia, whatever. So you see the exercise. The exercise is to take the thing we shared, the one we value. We know, and we have many encounters when we are sort of shocked to hear when we criticize the globalization. Yes, 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 but you want to go back to, and usually 5 minutes later, it's the cave where you have this very strange system of light, which is chandelle. How do you say chandelle in English? Comment tu dis? Candle. You all have that. If you have slightest interest in ecology, and if you make a slightest critique of anything about globalization, immediately you are told, you want to go back to the candle in the cave. I mean, or the equivalent of that. And if you want to do that on science, 5 minutes later you are, yes, but Galileo, etc. I mean, this is the sort of argument that and they make sense, this argument, because the orientation movement that we have in our disposition is actually not much more than that. If it's not going there, then it's going there. I mean, there's no alternative. We are extraordinarily poor in inventing futures. And every time we invent future, we have to map them here. And the most extraordinary element of that is the complete impossibility of the ecological movement and parties to escape the trap of being neither left nor right. If you begin to say, no, I'm not left or right, they say, then you are from the right. Because they are projecting this question here. But ecological movement and parties, even though they have mostly disappeared, at least in France, and all of the mass of people doing activism everywhere in the world, they are not looking at this line. They are, with all the mess, difficulty, confusion, looking to a different territories. Which is, of course, if you do a little bit of geometry here, it looks like the middle of this place, but it's not. It's another place. It's another attractor. And this is why I'm interested in many different things, which is to try to define the land, the soil, the earth, on which actually we would need in order to be able to sort the different values which were entirely invested in these two attractors, each of them has now disappeared. If not, it's very clear that we will all move to the identity politics, in spite of what we say. We can claim it's, look at the complete impossibility of Democrat and Republican in the US to just stop Trump. I mean, they can't argue with people who say, so panicked by the globalization, whatever we do, we want to be back to the land of old. Give us our identity. Everything we would be able to sacrifice. We want to be, it's like a sort of going to the boat when the thing sinks. So the solution, if you follow me, is to try to get, okay, let's collectively try to draw the figure and this element here, okay? And I have a few minutes left to do this exercise, and I need again my blackboard and my excellent diagram. I'm known for my bad diagrams. It doesn't matter because I like them. So, we have 3 attractors and not 2. So we call it the land. It's very bad, but you understand, these are concepts. So we have a globe, which is 2 qualities of being too big and too small. And let's say we have the Earth, but of course, we should not confuse it with the globe. Now, what are the characteristics that we could actually begin to distribute if we were doing this sort of selective test? And here we need, I'm going to do it, but this is a seminar, so you have to do it as well with your own value, and we will do it in the discussion because my obsession might not be your obsession. And I hope not, actually. So, for instance, one of the things here, which is an extremely important value, is the sort of protection. And we know from workers' dispute during the last 2 centuries that every time, and this is Polanyi's as well as Marx and everybody else, as soon as workers or laborers talk about protection, they were immediately told that this was something they should abandon for the global. So the movement was, on the contrary, no protection. Okay? Which is already very complicated value. Because most of the movement toward what I call the great global backlash to identity requires protection for a good reason, which is that there is no life in the globe. The globe brings no protection, and that cannot be a value either, and we should be able to express this. Protection is necessary without being immediately shift back to the archaic resisting definition of what protection is. So we need to invent a definition of protection as a necessary value, which would be happy to put somewhere here. So the Earth, whatever we do on Earth, and not only us, but even the frogs, and even the French frogs, have to be protected. I'm not talking about protecting of species. You understand? This is a concept of values. When someone tells us, you are archaic, regressive, traditionalist who want protection, we should not be preemptively accused of immediately shifting along the line I drew here backward. We should say, no, hey, wait a minute. We want to go here. We want to be able to define something which we share with other species, which is something around the notion to be elaborated of protection. It won't be the same past. It won't be an archaic definition of protection. But we have to recognize, and this is why I drew my little diagram, that we have to be able to talk with the people who are attracted by this one, that we share something. Yes, we do share something about the value of being protected. I'm not talking about flexi security. Everybody talk. In France, we are all saying we should. If only we were Dane. And of course, with the sun now, everyone is going to say, let's move from France to have flexi security and sun. Second point, I have a very long list, but I'm sure you can increase it. The other thing is, of course, that this has some characteristic of being local. And we have been obsessed during the time of the modernist parenthesis by the distinction between universal, local. So if someone says, I've found a new way to farm in ways which is not the destruction of the environment, which doesn't obey what Anna Tsing called the plantatiocene model of agricultural production, immediately people say, oh, it's local. It's just local. And then you are sent again along this line and basically having to prove that this is scalable. So, of course, every time someone does anything, it's criticized as being just local in this thing. So there is something, and it's a very interesting gradient here, which is to say, no, it should actually be something, and here we don't have a word, because if I say global, I know the word glocal has been tried, but here I want to use Haraway's word, which is the word wordless. Wordling. Wordling, yes. Well, it's not your language either, so you won't bother. So, this is a very interesting work. And of course, it's the case in many of the people who are working in this direction. Because wordling has some of the characteristic of the globe, in the sense that it's actually sharing interest with many species. It's not just located in one little canton of the world, like it would be here, but it's not a universal element. And it's not, the word is exactly that, and this is why Anna's work is so important. It's not scalable. It has a different definition of scale. And it's something which, with my students, some of them here, we are trying to work a lot, because it's very complicated to cartography a non-scalable space. Okay? So this is another features which would be interesting to describe. Now, I'm not sure that I should go on, because I'd like you to work, actually, now. One of them, which is important for me now, which is linked to yes, sorry, this is very important. This was lived and real, or symbolic if you want, doesn't matter. This was divided, will and lived. So this is a great moment of bifurcation between objective quality and subjective quality. When we were modern, we could always say of anyone criticizing modernism, either you're silly and it's just a fancy of your imagination, or very politely say, oh, it's interesting, let's do some ethnography about it. So the two versions was always in sort of sense, or you all know if you do Chinese Tai Chi, or if you eat only whole rice or something like that, or if you go to your diviner, you always try to do this little job. Except now it's not possible. So now on Gaia, not on the universe, but on the physis, on this little skin there, you have something which is difficult to describe, which is realistic. I don't know how even to do it. Realistic, objective, let's try that, multiplicity. Which means that the power of dismissing a position because you use this real lived actually is losing ground. And to reground, because this is a word which I like, which Alexandra was here, told me to use, is regrounding is actually the word which would use here. Okay? And we can go on, and I hope we will do it in the discussion. So, conclusion. Now, I needed actually a much bigger thing because I'm worried that I erase these things and then you forget about my point, and then you will say, where are we going? Because it's a lecture about the future. And I erase it, so it doesn't work. I put it here, the third attractor. I put it here because it has a strange, and of course I'm playing with geometry here and mythology as well, but it has the nice features that it's down. Here, during the modernist history, we were actually looking for décollage and degrounding. And here we are regrounding. But of course, we don't want to land here, even though the whole of Europe and most of the world is actually trying to land here. Because if you followed me, they know the globe is not actually something which has any existence. All STS people knew that from the beginning. You don't live in res extensa. No scientists live in res extensa. But we had this idea that the utopia of going to the globe was still feasible. Now no one believes that. I mean, no one. At least everyone sensed that this massive promise which had been done to all of us that we could modernize the planet will not do for lack of a planet. Right? But where is this planet? So strangely, the people who are suddenly hearing, even though no one actually articulated that clearly, everyone who hears that the globe is not the direction where we are going, suddenly are asking this strange question, where is the planet? And we have a sort of uncertainty, is it here or is it here? And it's not the same figure, it's not the same science, or at least not the same set of science, or the same spirit of science, and it's certainly not the same politics. Because those who are interested in going there will have somehow to define so we are, I think, most of us is somewhere here, lots of quotation mark, this is us. Sorry, I need to draw that well because this is us. We are all lost here. And it's unfair to give lectures to orient everybody to say we are lost. Well, we are not lost because now we have 3 different things where we look and we try out and select what is progressive and what is regressive. But now progressive means going this way. And regressive might be 2 different things, going this way or going this way. And alliances are possible. See, the great danger, and here I'm talking in a discipline I don't know, which is political science, is that the great danger is that if you accuse all those movements to be simply reactionary, populist, and neo-fascist, you won't talk to them. You would just, and it's very striking, is that every single time people in the New York Times or elsewhere say Trump lied, people say, it's completely out of the question. This is not a question of lying. It's not a question of having a political position. It's not a question of platform. It's a question of what in French we say, sauf qui peut. Sauf qui peut. well, I don't know the word in English. I mean, it means this is gone. You are not telling us. Let's get there. Yes, I know I'm finished. So the reason why I put it here is because it's below. We have to learn to land. And of course, it's very complicated to land because we are still trying to get into this horizon. And there are many different figures for that. But the one I was interested in introducing to you was the maelstrom. That two of my students from SPIP are actually doing a play on that maelstrom. Because it's amazing that the guy who has taken a maelstrom is actually quite enough. And suddenly very alert and detect the difference between what sinks and what floats. I hope I've shown some of the things that float. Thank you very much.